Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Anyway, welcome to Revolution Radio. As I said today, we are going to be speaking with someone who I met at Occupy Roanoke a couple of years ago, and I was very fascinated by his passion for the Ron Paul revolution, and he actually is an activist and a spiritual seeker whose most recent involvements in political activism is centered around the Ron Paul 2012 campaign for president. His activity led him ultimately to being elected as the delegate for Virginia to the 2012 Republican National Convention in support of Ron Paul. Anyway, let's welcome my friend Caleb Coulter. How do you say your last name?
Yeah, Coulter.
Coulter, I said it right.
Thanks,
and actually, this is great because he is here live with me in the studio. We don't get to do this very often, so it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit, Caleb. First of all, let's start off with you a little bit and what got you motivated into working with the Ron Paul campaign. I guess he started getting known back in 2006. Did it start that early for you, or was it a little bit later?
Not quite that early as far as my involvement with the Ron Paul campaign necessarily. I didn't know who Ron Paul was back in 2006. But I suppose I was coming of an age and political awareness that opened the door for me to be ready to hear about such a guy as Ron Paul when another year rolled by. 2007 saw the season of the Republican and Democratic parties seeking nominees for the president. As you know, with George Bush leaving office, the Republicans and the Democrats both had to go through their primary processes and find a candidate to run for president. And so I was introduced to Ron Paul through that primary process, seeing him in the televised debates between all the candidates on stage. I was watching avidly both the Democratic and the Republican fields for anybody who sparked an interest, or rather, at the time I was probably just a hopeless cynic in as far as politics go, and got a rise out of just despising about everybody that I saw on stage. So Ron Paul was a breath of fresh air that caught me a little bit off guard, I suppose, but by the time we got fairly well into the political season and approaching 2008, when those primaries all began and eventually the parties chose their nominees, I had already found myself a little bit enamored with Ron Paul, and so I was involved in the 2008 campaign nominally. I did a little bit of volunteer work, ended up my first foray into actual volunteering for a political organization in traipsing off to Iowa at the beginning of that primary season to do some door knocking in Iowa, which is where the first caucus in the nation was held, and has a big impact on how the rest of the primary season will unfold. And it was a really interesting trip. I met so many interesting people who were kindred spirits, if you will, and that was my entry into having an interest in Ron Paul and doing any real campaign work for him. Before that, I'd been more interested in simply peace activism, anti-war or such. I really got the fires going under me to work in the field of anti-war demonstration and such with the Iraq invasion in 2003. I was really appalled by that, and had already made up my mind pretty well about what I thought of George W. Bush and his wars and such, and occupation in the Middle East, and was very put out by that, and that's how I kind of got my legs in activism to begin with. By the time the Ron Paul campaign rolled around, I had a little bit of practice by then and met a lot of people, wavered all over the place in terms of ideology and such, but when I saw him in those debates, I heard a lot of common sense things that I was just amazed that anybody was willing to speak that clear of a truth on national televised debate. And so it caught me off guard, and I continued to follow him from then, and I had any number of different forays in activism in the years between the 2008 campaign and the 2012 campaign, but by the time 2011 rolled around, and I had pretty well anticipated that Ron Paul was likely to run again, so I was pretty much ready to go by the time it came around that he was announcing he was going to run, and that's where it really kicked off for me as far as taking on any real responsibility of my own in initiating political activity for that campaign. And I started up Roanokeers for Ron Paul, and we served as a kind of unaffiliated, unofficial wing for the campaign, and just organized ourselves to get into any amount of activity that we could to spread the word about the candidate and talk to people about the ideas that his campaign centered around.
And that's quite a mouthful. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
No, and that's fantastic. I feel that you do show a lot of integrity in your activism, and you definitely have seem to have the ability to get things moving. From what I saw, I mean, I've got to tell you, I was very surprised and impressed when I think you showed up like on Fox News or something, or one of them when they were filming I forgot what it was. What was it when they counted the votes and they didn't want to count certain votes, or?
I think what you might be referring to is on the actual primary voting day in Virginia. A news crew came by and did a short interview with me about what I was out there for, just trying to talk to folks as they came into the polls. And in Virginia, we had an exceptional situation in that Ron Paul and Mitt Romney were the only two candidates to have qualified to be on the ballot in Virginia for the Republican primary. So we were out there doing the best we could we were out there doing whatever we could to reach people at that last minute on primary day. Certainly we tried to do everything we could leading up to then, but to turn some heads and get people to take notice that Ron Paul really had a chance in Virginia. And that's probably where you saw me. But
yeah, well, there was something else. I saw you on the ground, on the floor of the Republican National Convention as well.
That would have been, maybe on Fox News and any number of other networks. Yeah, and what you might have seen of me was probably me screaming my head off. It was quite an experience. I did end up there as a result, ultimately, of the campaigning work that I did, and it was a totally unexpected result. I certainly didn't get involved in the campaign in an effort to find myself in a position like that, but with the organizing activity that I did, it became apparent after the primaries went down and people voted. We realized that the campaign was not over, because the process of the political parties themselves that determine who the nominee will ultimately be are not necessarily so straightforward as who wins enough primaries in the various states to secure that magical number of delegates that you might have heard a lot of talk about, since the Republican field was so wide open in a lot of ways, or at least there were a large number of people vying for the nomination from the beginning of the primary season, that you heard a lot of talk about Mitt Romney needing to reach this certain number of delegates through winning a number of primaries in the various states that would put him over the top to officially be the nominee and whatnot. Well, being involved in the campaign and learning a lot about the process of the parties themselves, that proved to us to be something that was a little bit of a myth, and that actually people involved on the ground at the local level all the way up are what determines who ultimately gets representation at these various conventions at the local level, state level, and the national level. And so I entered my name into nomination for one of the positions to represent the state of Virginia as a national delegate at large, and went to the Virginia State Convention with an awful lot of people from across the state being Ron Paul supporters who took it upon themselves, through others like myself encouraging them, to get involved in the actual process that determines the end results here, rather than just thinking you get a chance to vote in the primary and that's it. You can actually be involved in the political party process, which I know is anathema to a lot of people who see the disgusting nature of American politics.
The blatant corruption involved.
and the duopoly here, the dichotomy of the two parties that most people would rather die than get involved in. But nonetheless, it's there, and we decided to see what we could do to get people involved and kind of overwhelm the system there. And we were pretty effective in that. My election as a national delegate at the Virginia State Republican Convention in 2012 is a sign of that we had a significant number of people in support of Ron Paul getting involved in the party process through the state, that a person like myself would certainly not have been in a position to be elected and sent to the national convention to represent the Republican Party of the state of Virginia without a huge plurality of people being involved that year in support of Ron Paul. And they knew it. The people who had been longtime party operatives, a lot of times, this is just going through the motions for these people that have been involved for so long in a political party that they, expect to send the likes of other Republicans who have been elected to high offices already as delegates and such. They go to the people that they see as the leadership of the party and whatnot to represent them at an event like a national convention, rather than just a do-it-yourself grassroots activist like me. So I was, included on a list with the governor and the attorney general and a couple of former governors and things like that, who were all Republicans, that they were at-large delegates for the state, and then little old me along with them. So it really was a sign of people being involved, enough people, a critical mass of people being involved in that process, so as to open the door that they knew they had to acknowledge our presence or pay the price politically later by trying to shut us out, which is what you saw in many states. People
absolutely.
The party going well out of its way to force Ron Paul supporters out of the room, out of the process, break their own rules for holding conventions and stuff, simply to prevent Ron Paul supporters from having a say in that and sending delegates to that convention that could have upset the kind of foregone conclusion that Mitt Romney would be the nominee for the party.
Status quo mentality.
Yeah, and we came a lot closer, I believe, than most people would imagine to actually having that number of delegates there at that national convention to have actually nominated Ron Paul. Again, even at the national convention, so many rules were broken and bent and changed at the last minute and such, simply because they were afraid that we really had that critical mass of support there that could have made Ron Paul the nominee for the party rather than Mitt Romney. And I would have loved to have seen that, obviously. I think that a Ron Paul versus Barack Obama election season
been very exciting.
really, really interesting, if nothing else, very exciting. I personally know so many people who would never imagine to vote for a Republican who would confess to me or confide in me that absolutely I would vote for Ron Paul over Barack Obama or any number of other Democrats or liberals, progressives, what have you.
Absolutely.
Because he represents something that I think really reaches into political truths across the board, that we have, again, this corrupted dichotomy of left versus right, that paradigm of, two dueling ideologies, and you're either in one camp or the other. And Ron Paul is somebody who reached across the spectrum, totally, whose ideas were able to reach out to people who genuinely have an interest in the future of this nation and in peace and progress and prosperity and liberty. In so many different areas of people's lives, they were able to see that this was a person who genuinely represented what he was talking about. He had a record of actually voting the way that he has campaigned for so many years. He'd been a congressman for dozens of years, and actually earned nicknames in Congress like Dr. No for being the only congressman willing to vote no on certain bills and such, say, a funding bill that would have included war funding for unconstitutional wars and such. And he's the only one with the political gumption to say, no, despite what else is in this budget that is a proper role of the federal government, this is abhorrent, and this is illegal, and this is unconstitutional, and I can't vote for it. There are any number of issues that campaign reached into that I think people from across the political spectrum can identify with, and I'm certainly one of them. I don't consider myself a staunch Republican or conservative. I even shy away from the designation of libertarian. Mm-hmm. But I am interested in peace and freedom of people to live their lives as they see fit without doing harm to others. And I have gone through a bit of a political awakening in terms of, what is the role of government in helping us to have that kind of a society that respects the rights and freedoms of the individual and does not use the government as a collective bludgeoning device for the majority to oppress a minority or to justify oppressing people halfway across the world or what have you. So, yeah, it's just kind of been a catch-all. I think just the campaign itself is something that represented just a faction of a larger movement that's going on right here, and this is what your show's all about.
Oh, that's what we're going to be talking about. We got 90 more minutes to be talking about that, but we have about 6 more minutes or 8 more minutes before the first break. So let me ask you. You said you do not like to be labeled libertarian or Republican, and I'm seeing a lot of that. I myself, I always call myself a liberal libertarian, which is kind of an oxymoron. Sure. Maybe, I don't know. Noam Chomsky says that libertarianism in the United States is nothing like it is defined as in the rest of the world, mm-hmm. or its founding principles, that libertarianism has moved, or some of it, and we spoke about this in the past, how some of it had been moved into racist, extreme religious idealism and whatnot. But yet it's funny that here in Virginia, especially here in the Roanoke Valley, I have a libertarian bumper sticker that talks about open love or something like that, and it's got the rainbow flag on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a libertarian governor candidate who's pro-marriage equality, right. and some of the people that I had known in the past with the Ron Paul Revolution were that libertarian sect that Noam Chomsky speaks of, mm-hmm. where we saw that mix. So I can relate to why people like yourself, people like myself, we don't want to be lumped into being called a libertarian or a conservative or liberal or progressive. It's all about the issues, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. That's what I try to keep my focus on all the way through this campaign. And perhaps it's part of why I was less effective than maybe I could have been if I had known from the beginning what precise political ends we could aim toward and achieve, such as, say, electing delegates and, taking over a significant role in the Republican Party, say. Those were all after effects to me of discovering a process of discovery about what was possible through that campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And all along for me, it was much more about talking with people about the ideas. And yes, I shy away from the political labels because even libertarian, which is one label that far less people are even familiar with than many of the other ones, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, constitutionalist, progressive, you name it, they're all very loaded terms to me. Yeah. Everybody has a different idea of what that means, and they either make friends or enemies based on these loaded terms that are really just their own preconceived notions of what that's supposed to mean. So you can tell somebody that you are liberal, and if they consider them self-identify as liberal, well, there you go. You're automatically halfway toward being political buddies and whatnot, until you start to dig deeper and you find out you really don't necessarily agree on an awful lot. And the same goes in reverse, that you might have somebody identify with a label that is seemingly opposite to your own and consider them from the get-go as an enemy, and then come to talk about the issues and find out later it's much easier to relate and that you share a lot of similar interests. That I just don't think those labels serve people any good to revert to them. It's a reductionist sort of logic that says I'm just out to find people who confirm my own beliefs, and I'm not really willing to do the intellectual hard work, the rigor of intellectual debate and discourse that would bring us to closer to solutions and understanding of each other. And that's something that I think our media outlets and our political system have done a phenomenal job in stifling over a number of years, is to keep us from being able to break free from those preconceived notions and those labels and such. They want us to identify with those things so that we are satisfied with, again, just a very immature reductionist form of intellectual debate and discourse that would get us any closer to solutions other than the ready-made ones that they are ready to trumpet out on the air, and through the bully pulpits that they have as elected representatives and such. And I really think that coming to understanding, getting better candidates, better leaders, better laws, and the whole gamut of how we organize our society depends on people taking more initiative for themselves to actually understand other folks at a local level. Is where it all begins. And avenues like the internet and the radio here, that you have this wonderful tool at your disposal to be able to have conversations with people that are not dominated by the production managers of some mega corporate.
And now back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio. We're having a really awesome conversation here with Caleb Coulter on the Ron Paul Revolution. If you missed the first half of the show, or the first quarter of the show, he has brought up some very important ideas. And before we went to the break, we were speaking about the ideologies of different political factions, and how, unfortunately, and Caleb, you're kind of moving into where I was hoping we were going to move this conversation into, is how, for me, the Ron Paul Revolution, it was not necessarily a Republican campaign, a Libertarian campaign. what it did was it made us, many of us, including myself, begin to ask questions that we never would have asked before. It kind of, again, with what I talk about the consciousness of humanity, it was a shift in the consciousness of humanity. We saw people supporting Ron Paul in Europe, in Asia, people that were like, we wish we could vote for him,
Absolutely.
And it was because of what he spoke of. He spoke of such simple ideas and really called out the corruption, or at least the corruption in the method of government, as is the status quo in D.C. at the time. What are your thoughts on the idea that he's just opened up a can of worms, for lack of a better term?
Oh, I think that's a great way of putting it, because, there's really not... Ron Paul is a conduit for a lot of these conversations that people are having now. I think his campaign was something that brought those questions to light and that has started conversations about things that we'd forgotten about even really being pertinent to the political debate in this country, where, again, it's been dominated for so long by kind of these wedge issues that put people in different ideological camps, and you identify with this party or that ideology and become satisfied with kind of a poverty of intellectual debate. And Ron Paul, yes, indeed, brought up issues that no one had brought to light in so long in the political debates in this country, that had people examining issues that they were never even aware of being issues, or that we had just come to accept that were off limits for politicians to talk about.
Yeah.
A couple of examples. A big one is the Fed, the Federal Reserve. I myself was among many who was fairly well unaware of what the Federal Reserve System is and what it does in this country, and why we should be having debate about it. I mean, and that is such a hugely important topic. For those that aren't aware, listening to the show, the Federal Reserve is the central banking system for this country, and it issues our currency. It manages monetary policy. That is to say, it controls interest rates at which banks borrow from each other. And ultimately, what it does is to control the flow of credit in this country and the value of the money that we use. This is a complicated thing that, like you said, he touches on a lot of simple issues and bring things to light that others just weren't simply willing to. But when you start to dig in deeper, that's where the really important stuff is happening, I think, with people becoming aware of issues like what control the Federal Reserve has over our country. And it's a private institution. It is a corporation that profits off of our having a paper currency to trade goods and services through, and through the power that it has of regulating the output of that currency and the amount of currency in the economy at large. It controls the value of the currency. It controls who gets the best access to money at its full value, and who suffers the consequences of an economy working on an inflationary system. Myself being at the bottom of the pole, I'm just a working grunt, I just make wages and tips and such. And so the money I put in my pocket at the end of the day will buy me whatever it's worth at the time. But we're continuing to devalue how much a dollar can buy through the practices of the Federal Reserve, inflating our currency and making all commodities and services really more expensive. Again, that's probably a thing that I shouldn't try to dig too deep into with the time we have on the radio here. But
I guess you could do a whole 2-hour session on that.
I'm quite sure you could do more than that.
Let me. One of the things I noticed, and speaking of the Federal Reserve, you did bring up that he brought this into not only into the vernacular, but into the discussion and into our consciousness. I've noticed that even the language changed after the Ron Paul revolution got started. You hear words like Federal Reserve now, or understanding the Federal Reserve. Nobody knew about Federal Reserve. Nobody knew what fiat money was.
Right.
Nobody knew what
Fractional reserve banking.
fractional reserve banking was. I mean, all of these have become common themes. And the wonderful thing that I love is that it's with younger people. We see people of the college years and beyond, and sometimes even younger, understanding these very important topics and these very important issues. For me, I just wanted to share that the whole Ron Paul revolution for me started, and I just wanted to share this little anecdote because it's a funny story how it started. Um, I was introduced to Ron Paul from the documentary America, Freedom to Fascism back when it came out in 2006. And what I found so interesting about the person who shared this with me is this woman was a middle-aged woman, worked very much so in the liberal politics, worked very much, was a part of the Chamber of Commerce that I was working with. And to have someone like that just be thrown back and say, you have got to listen to this man speak. He's amazing. You're going to love him. He's really got it going. It just goes to show how he did reach across, across the aisle, like you said. But again, for me, it was Ron Paul really helped expedite the rest of what I call my spiritual awakening. I may have had my spiritual awakening in my early 20s, but it wasn't until I understood not only the corruption of how the paradigm is being run, but to understand the paradigm itself. And I think he's educated a lot of people on that. Like you said, bringing in terms like fractional reserve banking. And I mean, how many of us really knew there was an international banking quote unquote cartel
Right.
until we started investigating and speaking about the Ron Paul issues?
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think so many people who came to jump on board with the Ron Paul campaign have similar stories. I certainly do. You know, and you spoke of your spiritual awakening and him kind of facilitating your growth in that. And I appreciate that you introduced me with a blurb about being a spiritual seeker and such, because a spiritual awakening of my own came well before an awful lot of political activity. I was motivated into political activity through first having a bit of a spiritual awakening of my own, and seeing that play out in my perception of politics of the day was how I became motivated to get into anti-war activism and the like. Definitely motivated by conscience before anything else. And Ron Paul's somebody who has enriched the language that we can use to debate what it is that we ought to be doing to act rightly and to organize our society in such a way that is best for everyone involved and is fair. And talking about the Federal Reserve and such, and breaking across ideological boundaries, you mentioned, and you said how you met me at a Occupy Roanoke event here in Roanoke with the blowing up of the whole Occupy movement across the country, starting on Wall Street. Well, the Federal Reserve System was a hot topic, and hopefully still is, amongst people working in the Occupy movement and such. That you saw that all over the place when you saw pictures coming out of Wall Street, people talking about the Federal Reserve being at the root of all of this. And it's not just this 1% who own everything and are just greedy and don't want anybody else to live well and richly and whatnot. Well, the Federal Reserve is at the heart of the systematic flaws that empower a class of individuals, a very elite few, to have such a dominating effect over the entire economy at large. And I mentioned earlier, in an inflationary economy, well, that 1% and those corporations that are so easily vilified by the left and whatnot, which, the Occupy movement has probably a lot more ties to classic progressive politics and such than it does conservative ones. I mean, you saw conservative pundits and such deriding the people involved in the Occupy movement and saying, oh, they're just lazy, jobless people who resent that some people can get rich and that they don't have the gumption to go out and do the hard work to get there themselves. Well, the Federal Reserve being something that entered into that debate, I wonder just how readily that would have been something at the forefront of people's understanding had not Ron Paul, since his entire time in Congress, but particularly in him being a more popularized figure in 2008 and such, bringing the Federal Reserve issue to the table. I wonder how many people would have allowed it to escape them, that huge link in the chain of the systematic flaws that we are suffering under in this economy that continues to empower an elite 1% or whatever you want to call it over regular working people and small businesses and the people who are the engine of productivity in this country. And that's exactly what the Federal Reserve does, is through its monetary policy and its lending policies, it gives benefit to those who are at the upper echelons of society and the financial systems, Wall Street trading and such, who can take new capital injected into the economy through the Federal Reserve, trade it around and make use of it to do profit for themselves. And by the time that new expanded currency base has worked its way into the rest of the economy through lending all the way down the chain to small banks and people, taking out car loans and mortgage loans and such, those people at the bottom of the chain who get that last lending are getting the money at a devalued level from where it first entered the economy. The people who get the massive influxes of new money and trade it around from that top level, they continue to enrich themselves off of whether or not it's good for the economy as a whole or not. So again,
we have to thank Ron Paul for educating us on these particular issues. We have a question. This is the second time it's being submitted, so let me just ask you, Caleb. Do you know anything about this video presentation, the Ron Paul predictions? Have you seen it, or do you know anything about it, and what are your thoughts on it?
I have seen a few videos floating around that refer to Ron Paul's predictions. So yeah, I think I can speak to that a little bit. Probably what the questioner is referring to are a number of things that Ron Paul, through his career in Congress, has brought up in debate time and time again about what policies we are enacting now and what their effect will ultimately be in the future. And it's tempting to call them predictions. I suppose they are really, but it kind of lends this notion of that he had some kind of a prophetic, vision of where we would be if we didn't change our ways or something. And really, it comes down to an understanding of what the issues are and what principles are at work that will lead through a logical unfolding of events that will ultimately have certain effects on our political systems and our financial systems and such. Some of those predictions, I suppose, are things along the lines of, Ron Paul warned us about the future of the economy based off of our monetary policy and continuing to rely on the private central bank, the Fed. to issue our currency, and what results we would see in what the economy would look like years down the road, which have certainly come to pass. You know, the banking crisis of 2008, just before the November elections that year, were something that were very clearly, if you go back and look at some of those videos that the listener is referring to of his predictions, that he clearly predicted that we're going to witness a kind of a crash like this because the system that we're operating under is flawed and only has a limited lifespan to it. That's not something that was just like this hocus pocus, Ron Paul can see through the crystal ball, so much as Ron Paul is an expert in economics and such. But a few other ones. I mean, he's referred to invasions of our personal privacy over the years, and how institutions like the NSA would inevitably come to invade our privacy, that the more power you give to the federal government to snoop into people's personal lives, the more it's going to take that inch and run a mile with it and abuse its power and move us closer to a tyrannical state of affairs where that is much the opposite of what the ideals were in the founding of this country, of personal freedom and the right of individuals to live their life in peace and a pursuit of happiness, and privacy from the powers of government, to where it's flipped on its head now, and we have a government that is so totally secretive about what it does, and private citizens' lives are nothing of the sort. They're not private at all. No. We have, a government with the intelligence capabilities to log and spy on everything that you do, down to, anything that you put on Facebook, and who's not on Facebook now.
Right.
As, these are.
Hey, I keep my camera backwards because I'm always worried they're looking. They can turn it on whenever they want.
We laugh, but the evidence is there that the capabilities for them to do that, to tap into any system like that, and sure, just come right on in through the back door of your personal camera on your computer and just check out what they can see on the other end at any given moment. Now, that's not to say they're doing it all the time to everybody or anything, but the capabilities are there, and the power is there to use those capabilities in a way that is entirely abusive of the notion of having, say, a Bill of Rights, that citizens ought to be allowed this defense against the powers of government. So I can't really pull out of my hat right now a slew of what those predictions might be from those videos that he's referring to, but I'd encourage anybody listening to just go put that in your YouTube search for Ron Paul predictions, and I'm quite sure you'll find a number of videos of him talking about things that, all the way back in the 80s or something, that, he's saying, we're going to have a society that looks like this if we enact laws like this, and see if it doesn't sound a little hauntingly familiar to you.
Absolutely.
People now talk about all the time whether or not we live in a 1984 style society and dystopia. And this is something that even in 1984, the actual year in this country, Ron Paul's in Congress talking about the need to check government power and make sure that we're not allowing it to gain such total access to our lives that would enable authoritarian style regimes to ultimately creep into this country that would seek to run every aspect of your personal life. We've gone a long way down that road, and certainly I think he saw the writing on the wall is probably a better way that I like to think about it than again this kind of crystal ball notion of predictions or anything. But yeah, do yourself a favor and go look for yourself, watch some videos.
No, I was just going to say that we have 5 more minutes. I was just going to say that I can't help but feel that this whole, like I said, Ron Paul got my attention in 2006, and it just seems to be a part of galvanizing the things that we're seeing today. The Ron Paul revolution, when it first started, it was basically a bunch of libertarian young folks that really aligned, or libertarian leaning college folks that aligned with his message. And now we're just seeing, these uprisings all over the world. We're seeing, Occupy Bulgaria or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Occupy Brazil, Anonymous Brazil, all the stuff that is going on around the world. And I can't help that he probably was a bit of a stepping stone. And as someone who is a spiritual activist, I feel, I don't want to discredit him, but I don't also want to give him all the credit. I feel that he definitely is very much a part of it, kind of like a, for lack of a better term, I hate to say the word guru, but I mean it in a sense that someone who taught us what we needed to learn at that time in order for us to have the information to move forward.
Absolutely. I mean, and I was very wary of all the way along wanting to be somebody in the lead of simply a cult of personality.
Yeah, and there was plenty of that.
And there is. It's an inevitable pitfall of so many different movements that identify with a particular leader or such. You can refer to him as a guru or something, and for some people, yes, absolutely, he's somebody who offered up lessons about things, or even just exposed you to an issue that you were before unaware of, or rather uninformed about, and he has inspired people to go and learn for themselves about, say, monetary policy and economics, things that sound really boring on the surface, but that are extremely critical to your understanding of how these overarching systems of control play out in your life, and what must be done to free ourselves from the chains of them. So yeah, I think he's definitely just a small part of a bigger thing happening in this country and all around the world. But he definitely deserves some credit for being a rallying point. That's what he felt like for me, as a rallying point for people who had many shared interests in uncovering the corruption and the just the failure of our systems in so many different areas, that he seemed able to articulate an angle on those problems and the proper solutions for them that got people really thinking and emerging from their shells of, again, those preconceived notions and ideologies.
And we just have a couple minutes left here for this particular hour, but I wonder, what has he been doing lately? Do you know? Have you been keeping up? I honestly haven't been keeping up. I'm sorry to say I haven't been keeping up.
I'll admit a little bit of lackadaisicalness in my own keeping up with some of that as of late. I worked an awful lot for that time period to push that campaign as far as we could, and when it came to a close, I tried to maintain some of the ties that I'd built with fellow activists and such, and but I have taken a little bit of personal time to recollect myself, allow myself to have a little bit of my own life, and if you lose your center, your spiritual motivation and such, then politics can be an extraordinarily either confusing and disheartening, or all-consuming kind of a thing where you forget yourself, and I dare not forget myself. So I've taken a little bit of time to recollect, and I don't doubt that before too long I will find my way back into some of that. But he himself keeps on trucking on. He's right now
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the justBernard Show here on Revolution Radio. As we continue our in-depth discussion here today about the Ron Paul Revolution, I'm being joined here live in my studio with Caleb Coulter, who is or was the Virginia delegate for the Republican Party representing Ron Paul during the 2012 election. As I had mentioned earlier, I had met Caleb through the Occupy movement. And one of the things that really kind of, as Peter Griffin says, grinded my gears about Occupy at that time was how resistant they were to Caleb sharing the Ron Paul message, even though I completely agreed with him. I know that many of us, now looking back, I know many people within the local Occupy movement regret pushing away people like Caleb and those that were offering at least discussion on the particular topics that Ron Paul represented. And like Caleb, I was also involved in the Tea Party during its birthing years. I remember going to Tea Party rallies in South Florida back in 2006, 2007. I don't even think it was called Tea Party back then. But and then of course Freedom Works took over, and that was the end of that. But let's I wanted to talk with you about that because we can both relate to some of what happened with the Occupy movement, with the Tea Party movement. It's almost as if, and this is merely my opinion and merely my observation, but I can't help but speak out on the fact that I was very hopeful when the Tea Party got started, and they were like, okay, well now we need to take our government back. They were using Ron Paul as a rallying figure, as you said earlier. And then suddenly we had the likes of Glenn Beck and Sarah Palin jump on board, and it was like, oh, I'm jumping off of this party. But and unfortunately, and again, and I don't mean to sound short on it, but it brought that element of racism, of bigotry, of just like angry right wing political activism that I just did not want to be a part of. When I joined the Tea Party, it was about uniting people and about uniting those that were aware of what was going on with our country. The same can be said for Occupy. The Occupy movement as well, at least here locally, I've spoken about it many times on this radio show, was a rallying point around the banks and getting people to unite against, quote unquote, the 1%. But unfortunately, it was some of the figures that were involved were very deaf to any issues that might have even hinted of conservatism or Tea Party or libertarianism. And I mean, honestly, I'll say it. I'll say it here on the air: is we lost everyone under 40 within the first year because of the inability to have dialogue clear. So you, as someone who's been a part of both, I was kind of, I was kind of taken aback because there was a picture of with what's that idiot? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm saying it. That idiot Goodlat. Oh, I was like, what is he doing standing next to Goodlat? But I guess it was at a Tea Party rally back when you were still inspired.
It was, and that had nothing to do with me seeing our local congressman Bob Goodlatte as a hero of that movement either or anything. He showed up to make whatever political points good with people involved in that. And yes, I've been involved in both. Definitely more in the Tea Party movement than in the Occupy movement, and I've been heartened by both of them and disappointed and disillusioned by both of them as movements. Let me touch on kind of what you said there about losing people under 40. I'm in that category, and I've seen things from both of those that just make me shake my head and wonder why it had to go in that direction. Both of them, I feel, started out of a wonderful, spontaneous kind of awakening, or just not even. It's not that people just suddenly woke up and decided to go out and protest one day. Events unfolded that triggered, people being motivated to get out in the street and have something to say about it, and that I was inspired by for both of those movements. In Roanoke, in particular. The Tea Party movement, to touch on the issue you said of it dating back a little before most people think of it, actually the Tea Party stuff was originally Ron Paul rallies back in the 2007 primary season. for president, and it was something that came back up as a nationwide kind of phenomenon at the urging of, say, Fox News Network and things like this, that kind of began that process of a certain brand of activism being co-opted by their messages and such. But in 2009, which was when that happened, the spring of 2009 on tax day was that first big phenomenon of across the country, people hosting rallies, calling them tea parties. And I showed up at one that was occurring here in Roanoke, and I was enthralled to see so many people showing up. It was probably upward of 500 people. Wow. For this very shortly organized rally at the river's edge here. And, there were any number of different kinds of people there, including some like myself who recognized the kind of Ron Paul connection to this Tea Party label that until later did not have its own kind of cachet that now, like you said, has been kind of co-opted by other figures and whatnot. But I showed up with just an interest in seeing who's there and what are they talking about, and it was really great. It was just citizens coming out to share with each other what they were fed up with. And as far as I'm concerned, unless you're motivated by the bigotry and whatnot, and you're just afraid of certain types of change and whatnot, with those exceptions, by and large, I encourage people to be out there voicing their dissatisfaction with their government and with their society and how well we treat each other and what systems we use to organize our political goals and such. But it was really interesting. I ended up showing up with my bullhorn that became a kind of de facto loudspeaker for the crowd, and people just lined up behind the bullhorn to share their thoughts about why they were there and what they wanted everybody to be aware of, to be motivated by and such. And so my presence there and my equipment, technological equipment that put me in the center of it, kind of led to a couple of people identifying me as an activist who they wanted to continue being involved, and we decided to form our own organization, the Roanoke Tea Party, and I was involved with that for a board member of that group until a little bit later on, when I had told them all along that if Ron Paul ran again, that was going to be my primary interest, and indeed it was. So I kind of stepped back from that one. Since then, I haven't been perhaps as satisfied with a lot of the things that the Tea Party's up to. In fact, I had to kind of battle with all through my involvement there with the stereotypes and the catch-all descriptions of what is a Tea Party and what is a Tea Partier and whatnot, and try and reach through to people to understand that there are serious grievances that need to be addressed, that this is a healthy part of the political process here in America for people to be getting out there and making themselves heard one way or another about those dissatisfactions. The Occupy movement is much the same way. And when I showed up to that rally in Roanoke and a few meetings for the ongoing movement here, it was much the same. I was really heartened by the inspired, disgruntled, nature of people showing up to voice their grievances and legitimate reasons for being concerned about what was happening. And that was triggered again by an event that the Wall Street collapses and the bailouts of the banks and whatnot, right? And that was actually one of the same issues that sparked the Tea Party thing. People think it was, Barack Obama was elected and the next day people turned out to protest having a black president or something like that. I did not find that to be the case. I will claim that I never met anybody in the Tea Party movement who may have been motivated by something like that. But by and large, that was certainly not what was going on there. What people forget about that first big Tea Party thing is that it was the bank bailouts that were the same thing that the
during the Bush years. It had nothing to do with Obama.
Right, it was the Bush years, and then Obama did it again.
Right.
And
part two. Oh, Bush part two.
Right. And so it was just this, like, and the Occupy movement sprang out of much of the same issues. That the banks are being bailed out, and they're just stealing everything from the populace at large, and it's all going to this 1% and whatnot. And I went there to share my thoughts with people and question them about, well, do you understand how that takes place on a systematic level? It's not just these bailouts that have been a recent unfolding of events that our system has gotten so cumbersome that it can't even support itself and has to be bailed out by the government. It's that private central bank is kind of the basis of this entire economy to be so corruptible. And so I played my part in being involved in both of those groups and whatnot. But my primary interest through those years was helping out with the Ron Paul campaign, because it was so much less susceptible, I felt, to those stereotypes and the potential to be co-opted. How could you co-opt a movement that has a kind of central figure to it than unless he gets co-opted. Right, unless he does. But that was one of the appeals of the candidate himself, was that he was so, in many ways, incorruptible, and had been proving that for years by talking about the same issues and really speaking his mind about them, and earning that loyalty from people that he was a genuinely interested in solutions and talking about real issues. Whereas those movements were much more amorphous, without central figureheads or anything like that, so that they were able to be kind of lumped into those ideological camps and such, and they kind of unfolded in a process of evolving into the very stereotypes that that those co-opting forces would have them be. So I've been a little disillusioned with both of those movements, but I still think it's good that people got out there and got involved and are still involved in many ways. I just hope that it's not the end-all be-all for any of those people, that now they've found this particular thing that they think is inspiring, and that they're going to allow it to shape them more so than they're working on their own development and intellectual discovery that ought to lead them to have more and more, ever more complex understanding of the issues at play, rather than just playing into these tired old phrases and such that people stump around on. But it's been interesting, and I think both of those movements did indeed draw from a lot of the same inspiration, originally at least, and have kind of gone off in their various directions, conservative or liberal or whatever.
And that's a shame, because I remember when, well, first of all, let me just say that the media had a big role in creating that division, of course. Mm-hmm. The media had all the liberals running scared from the Tea Party because they were gun-toting racists, and then we had the media talking about the Occupy movement, where a bunch of homeless drug addicts raping people in the park and defecating, and they were just dirty hippies. And of course, how better to divide, especially when you're talking about, let's say, Southern conservative gun-toting Republicans versus the liberal, socially liberal, not even necessarily economically liberal. And that's another distinction that I like to talk about, is there's a difference between social liberalism and fiscal liberalism. But anyway, that was one of the things I couldn't help notice that really, at least here locally, the media was one of the reasons why we saw the movement slowly dissolve into now it's called the local one is called Progressive Roanoke or Roanoke Moving Forward or something to that effect.
Right.
But it's because the media had tainted the word occupy so badly that they had voted to remove the word occupy. And sadly for me, that was like, well,
Right.
you know what? I'm an occupier, so
Yeah, that's funny. The Tea Party, as somebody who was involved on the ground level with a Tea Party organization, we actually considered changing our name very soon after that initial kind of upstart event to something that didn't include the name Tea Party because we wanted to be sure that we did not
right.
fall victim to that overarching set of stereotypes that the media would have portrayed it as being. We ultimately decided to keep the name and, do fight the battle there where it was to be had, rather than trying to distance ourselves from that caricature of what a Tea Party is and what kind of people are Tea Partiers. We decided, no, we need to keep this and own it and make it ours and
take it back.
Right,
Yeah,
and
that was
to
my
hold on to it and to champion ideas that are actually worth fighting for, rather than allowing the media to usurp every last Tea Party across the country, which are many and very different anywhere you go. Yes, there are some uniting factors that make people identify with that from the get-go, but there is no monolithic, Tea Party organization or anything like that, just as there is no monolithic central figure or group that leads all of the Occupy groups or anything like that. So I actually wasn't even aware of that happening to the Roanoke Occupy group, is that they changed their name to sound like a Barack Obama campaign arm, but
I'll bite my tongue. I'll bite my tongue, but I will say the Obama campaign was the end for me. Uh, it's funny because and I'll share this because you were there. I remember there was a Barack Obama rally, and here I was, all like I'm going to cover this rally, but I'm thinking of covering it from like the Occupy standpoint. It's like let's get somebody on the ground there to live stream it. Like all the different protesters are like, yeah, let's protest Barack Obama.
right.
And it turned out our streamer ended up being in the rally, and two of the facilitators were in the rally.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, you were one of the protesters.
I was.
And unfortunately, you were seen next to a man with a rebel flag, and that creates all kind of ruckus for me.
Yeah. I have had to allow a certain room for guilt by association that I really wish people could look beyond things like
Yes.
that. It was like, yes, I was on a side of the street protesting Barack Obama's campaign stop in our town here, and there were throngs of people lined up down the sidewalk to get into this rally area, and here was a group of us across the street composed of Ron Paul supporters, Tea Party people, Republicans, conservatives, libertarians,
Activists.
right, and some Occupy people who were there to protest Obama's presence and what he represented. And so, yeah, there's going to be some guilt by association there. That there was a guy who I didn't even know who showed up waving a Stars and Bars flag, and what that means to him, I don't know necessarily. What it means to any number of people across the street, it could have very well been, you racist pig, but
Right.
I don't know that, and I don't care to be associated with that kind of bigotry myself. But it's the price you pay for getting involved, is that you're not always going to be dealing with people who are your same purist ideology or anything like that. You have to be willing to stretch yourself and get uncomfortable,
That's a
with who
good
you
point.
end up being associated with. So my deal, again, is not to try and make friends in politics based on a notion of a shared ideological standpoint or anything like that, so much as always, always, always bringing the conversation around to real issues and seeing if we can't agree on what the nature of the problem is and what solutions could possibly be. Um, it's funny, with the dichotomies there of the conservative and liberal movements there in the Tea Party and the Occupy movement. I've heard it said before that if you are young and not liberal, then you don't have a heart. And if you are old and are not conservative, then you don't have a brain. I don't know that I'd agree with that at all necessarily, but it points to a certain kind of truism that, yeah, identifying with liberalism is kind of a bleeding heart. You care for people in the world and you want people to be treated well in socially and whatnot. You want to do best for the poor and the downtrodden, and you want to be sure that society is organized in a way that takes care of people and does not unduly punish or inhibit people from being able to live the lives that make them happy. Whereas, they say you get older and you mature into your political consciousness, telling you about these conservative notions of, abiding by the rule of law and the Constitution and having strict limits on the powers of government, and that leads to the notions that the government is not there to simply provide for everybody and make things fair and whatnot, but rather simply to ensure that the government gives equal protection under the law and otherwise does not infringe property and try and redistribute wealth and things like that. And all of those things, are what we need to get a better understanding of why people come to think about things in those terms, rather than just, again, relying on those notions of, well, I belong to this camp or that one. And that little saying, I think, illustrates that very well, is that I can see where somebody would have come up with a saying like that, but at the same time, we need to get a whole lot farther down the road in how to best understand each other and why we self-identify as liberal or conservative or any number of different terms, rather than having that be enough to explain
Yeah.
who we are and what we believe.
And you know what? Speaking of, I guess the label of Tea Party, a good example. And speaking of the cult of personality, and I don't know what your opinion is, and forgive me if it's different than what I'm about to say, but this whole notion of Rand Paul being the next Ron Paul. And I have to disagree. I don't see him as full of integrity as his father. I see him leaning more toward what the Republicans want the Tea Party to be. That's not to say he hasn't done some things that are very, I mean, respectable. He's fought on certain issues that I happen to agree with, but there does seem to be more of a tendency to that old Southern conservative mentality versus Ron Paul kept that out of the political spectrum, and it seems like his son seems to be putting it into the political spectrum of, whether it be abortion or gay rights or anything like that. So it worries me now that, now that his father has retired, that I see so many young people looking for that cult of personality or that someone to get behind.
Mm-hmm.
Might be doing what the liberals did with Obama. It's like, oh, hope, hope, hope. and it's kind of just it's
Yeah.
not what we're thinking it is.
Yeah, and liberty has been a rallying cry for so many involved in the Ron Paul campaign and even the Tea Party and such. And even that word is very ill-defined. And that might be the cry of people jumping on the bandwagon for Rand Paul. Is rather than hope, hope, hope and change, it's liberty and whatnot. But nobody really knows what that means. Just like nobody really knows what hope and change Barack Obama actually was. He might have specified awfully well about it, but he's a great orator. But when it came down to it, what hope and change did he actually bring to the White House that all those people supporting him with those notions of what they thought that hope and change was about, that ultimately didn't prove true? So yeah, I haven't made up my mind about Rand Paul. I agree with you that I don't think he's the same man as his father, and I dare say it is not going to be so easy for me to necessarily jump on board with that one, even as much as I now have acquired some of the experience in the political realm to be involved in party politics and such that could very well help to secure a nomination for somebody like that in the next season. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I don't as readily identify with Rand Paul. I think you're right that he seems to be much more the political pragmatist and opportunist than his father, in that Ron always seemed to try and bring the focus always back to the issues and the principle underlying the issues. You'd have somebody in a debate ask him a question about some loaded issue or whatever, and you get practiced at seeing how they do this in the media and such, that they'll set you up for a certain kind of an answer based off the way they pose a question. And Ron always had this just incredible ability, in my eyes, to take the principle of the concern in a questioner's inquiry and turn it around into, let me show you what assumptions you're making when you ask that question and what principles I see as at work in that issue, and therefore my take on it. And he could point it off in the direction back toward this kind of universal, let me tell you about something that everybody needs to be aware of and think about, rather than, yes, I'm going to play into a certain brand because I know that there are X number of people out there who are going to get on my side if I say it this way, versus that. And so I think Rand is playing a little bit more into that willingness to do the politically convenient thing to get a certain base of support. I don't know his character as well as I feel like I understand Ron Paul's, in whether or not to trust him as somebody who genuinely has the same sort of end goals of peace and prosperity and personal freedom for the citizenry here and such that his father does. I'm quite sure they have a lot of overlap, but I haven't made up my mind about him entirely, and I understand the concerns that people have from both the side of, there are many who, like maybe yourself, who identified with Ron Paul as somebody worthy of you breaking loose of your usual association with a certain type of candidate or politics, to consider something a little bit.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio. Again, we've been having this pretty amazing conversation about the Ron Paul Revolution. We've covered everything from the Tea Party to Occupy to the Federal Reserve, and we were just talking about Rand Paul. And by the way, I am here with Caleb Coulter, who was the Virginia delegate for the Republican Party representing Ron Paul in the 2012 election, and
One
has
of
been
them.
one of them, along with the governor and the
Yeah,
other
I don't want to
idiots.
sell my friends short.
Oh, and your good friends were helpful to this all. But Caleb, I can't help but wonder, and we were just talking a little bit about Rand Paul and the future of the movement and whatnot. But taking that out of the equation, we've seen the Ron Paul revolution galvanize so many people and educate so many people, bringing so many issues and language into the vernacular of our society. I mean, who would have thought that questions on the Federal Reserve would be in any of these presidential debates? Who would have thought that the Occupy movement would have brought some of these issues in so many years later? So I guess my question to you is, what is your feeling, or maybe even your intention? What would you like to see happen now that, okay, here we are getting ready to get into another long, draining election cycle. It's the Hillary commercials will be out any day now, I'm sure. I don't know who they're going to push for the Republicans. Maybe Rubio, Rand, Paul, or something. I don't know. But here we go. It's going to start all over again, and it seems, unfortunately, the presidential campaign seemed to be a big distraction for many activists. And I wonder, what would you like to see happen during this next couple years as far as these issues that we are mutually trying to work toward less government, or at least less Federal Reserve control and whatnot. What do you think is the next step for our activist movement?
It's a really good question, and any number of answers that are right for different people. I know that I have friends who were involved in the Ron Paul campaign who are very much still interested in holding that foot in the door of inter-party politics, so that, say, they can have an influence on who the next Republican nominee for president is. No doubt Rand has a heavy hand to play in that, simply through what he's done so far and through his association, obviously, with his father, and having a lot of people being willing to at least give him an ear because of that. But I don't know for myself how much I will be ready to jump back in full force into an overtly political campaign or anything like that. But some people will, and I'm quite sure that's one facet of it that is positive. And I would encourage anybody who does identify strongly with a particular candidate to go for it and get involved and try and find others to do the same. One thing that was amazing to me that I wish more people seem to have very concerted interest in being involved in politics rather than just activism or griping at your television set about the news of the day or anything. Get involved, and you find how easy it might be with a small group or a large one, even better, to insert yourself into the actual political structure. As I said toward the beginning of this interview, someone like myself becoming a national delegate to represent this whole state, I was just one of 13 people who went to the national convention who represented the whole state of Virginia. We had more coming from Virginia, but at the state convention, there were 13 people, elected to do that. Me and several other Ron Paul supporters were elected as part of that set of 13 people, again, because of the number of people who had gotten involved in the process that forced the party to acknowledge our presence and the power that we had over them, simply by nature of how many people showed up.
Right.
Politics is like many other things, 90% showing up.
Yeah.
So, for some, I'd say future will reflect some of that you're going to be involved in overt political activity, in political party work, and trying to find candidates to break the chains of the stereotypes and the caricatures of what the political parties are that we see today. For others, and this probably is more the direction I feel inclined to go, there are many more avenues for being involved and carrying on the conversations with people that will help us to evolve consciousness here in this country and around the world of what is it that we really want out of our social systems, governance, and what is a good economy for? What does that reflect? How do you get there? And education is a huge thing. I mean, none of this can move forward without people continually seeking to learn more and have a better understanding of the issues that come into play in striving after those ideals of better society and better interpersonal relationships with each other and such. And that's my main focus, I think, is local involvement in community building, in finding better ways to seek out fellow do-gooders and seekers of inspiration and such, and build your own networks. Find the ones that are already there and get involved. You don't have to. Again, I said this earlier. You're going to get a little bit uncomfortable probably with occasionally who you find yourself associated with. But so long as you're boxed into having to have everybody that you endeavor to get into activism with, or any number of endeavors, if you think they need to be a clone of you in terms of how they think about everything, then you're not going to get very far. And I wouldn't want to be involved in a society like that anyhow, where everybody's effort was simply to make everyone just like themselves.
I think the government's doing a good enough job.
Yeah, they're doing a pretty good one, and the media and such. And there's a big one. The media. I think things like this show and so many others like it that are just popping up all over the place, that the internet has enabled people to have more and more access to free communications and free speech in those communications, where you are unbarred by what your
corporate sponsors,
by the money behind the project, and by your production managers and the people that tell you what message is okay and not okay to take out to people. I am very much interested in that, in helping to build local community, in that there are more places for people to relate to each other about all of these issues, to learn together, to develop better structures for living side by side together, for overcoming some of these systems of dependence and control that we are all, it's a great fantasy to have this notion of a country where we're all in it together and whatnot. And you hear that from people all the time about, we're all in this boat together and we got to survive together, we got to get along together and whatnot. And it's true, but so long as we are looking to these enormous systems of, say, a federal government or a central banking economy or things like that, that unite us all under one particular set of rules, and in most cases one particular set of tyranny,
soft.
Then we're not going to get very far. I'm quite determined that having everybody come to some sort of notion of a democratic form of government where 51% of the population feels one way, and therefore we ought to be able to take the entire country in the direction of this ideal, I think is a failed way of thinking about it.
It's
So
like a mob rules mentality.
right. And, I don't think there's anything wrong with hoping for, say, everybody across the country and across the world having a more tolerant society, or a society that cares better for the weakest members of society, or anything like that. Those are great ideals, but let's find more practical ways of implementing those ideals. And I think the solutions are much more based on local activity, local community building, local economy, simply knowing your neighbors better, having better structures around to get your information from, the free access to internet, and providers of information like this show and any number of others that are out there, that are not this monoculture of the mainstream media that all tell you the same things in all of their news loop cycles and whatnot.
And unfortunately, we're starting to see that in alternative media, where certain alternative medias are just repeating the same story over and over
Sure.
as well. And of course, they're the bigger ones with more money, but
Sure.
you're starting to see that as well. We need to be careful about that.
And that points again to the problem of the corruptibility of systems as they get too large. Again, why I'm saying local is better, small is better. There's no reason why you have to feel the need to be the biggest one to get the right message out there or anything like that, because the bigger you get, the more successful you get in growing like that, the more susceptible you are to having your hands tied by the money, or whatever number of ways that corruption creeps in. And you might not even recognize it until you're in so deep that you realize one day you wake up and suddenly ask yourself if you and your organization have not been misled or corrupted. Most people, I don't believe, go into something endeavoring to deceive everyone and simply to make as much money as they can and whatnot. But you get so far along that those are just a part of human nature and the human experience, that that you can only get so powerful before that power begins to turn its head on you, and you're chasing the tail of a dragon or something, or holding on to the tail of a tiger, or whatever you want to say. Right. So I don't think there's any need for people to feel like they need to take over the systems that are already there. That's a big part of, I think, what drives that political fever that you were referring to, of people are going to get distracted by the next big political season. And, it's a big thing. Who is going to lead this entire country? Who's going to be the next president? So everybody's got to get involved, because that's such a hugely important thing that nobody, should dismiss the importance of getting involved in something like that. And I'm not necessarily convinced that that's the case. I think that that it's really only from the bottom up of changing hearts and minds, and our culture of how we get information and share information with each other, and come to understand each other and tolerate each other and provide for each other. All of those things need to be more localized and more independent of central systems of administration, because those systems of administration, while so often, like, say, you try and take over leadership or something with people that resemble your ideals, so that you can implement changes that would be good for everybody, and all you ultimately end up doing is being the new bully. So don't focus on trying to take over those systems that you think have such a control over everything, so much as to work from the ground up, work with real people, hold true to your ideals, and find little ways every day to implement small changes that will ultimately add up. And again, things like the internet and the variety of activities that people are involved in, and access to information is an example of widespread small changes. I mean, how many things can you point to on the internet that everybody knows about, that should know about? It's okay. Those things are having an impact for those that are aware of it and are tapping into it and using it as a motivation or a tool to implement the small changes that they can do. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that one of the biggest how shall we say oh geez, I don't know if you want to call it debunking or critiquing or whatnot. People always ask me, what have you done to create change? Here I am. I have a radio show. I do a internet television show. I run an international activist community, internet spiritual activist community, Facebook pages, YouTube videos, all of this stuff. We asked for donations, and people were like, "Well, why? What have you done to change the world? What have you done? Show me, what laws have you changed?" And the same thing happened with Occupy, where we were all constantly, what have you done? You haven't done anything. And my response to them is kind of like what you're saying right now, is that it's very important for us to build a community, and I think we've done a really good job of that with G.I.C. We've got a great, small community of 4,000 people around the world. I think that's a good start. And we have, interaction, we have discussion, we have people working on projects together on a local level or even on an international level. I work on projects with people all the time on the radio or TV to do these types of talks and to educate people. And I think that's the key, or the key answer that I would give, is that we're raising the consciousness. We're making people think. And I feel that as we progress as a human society, and I don't mean American or European, I mean on a global level, as we are beginning to really acknowledge our interconnectedness and to understand what's happening all around the world, and the idea that we're all human, we're all going to have shortcomings, and we are all different, and to not tolerate one another, but to accept one another. I feel that the word is tossed around quite a bit, like, we should tolerate gays or tolerate blacks or tolerate the Tea Party, tolerate Occupy. No, we are one human family. We need to accept those differences, not tolerate the differences. If we don't accept the fact that we are different, we're not going to get anywhere. But, the reality of it is, like I said, people say, well, what are you doing to change things? And I feel that one of the most important things is, like what you said, keeping people educated, giving them an alternative way or alternative viewpoint, and not necessarily say, well, you have to think this way in order to be, I'm sure you see it a lot in the, whether it be the political or the truth movement. You hear people calling people sheeple or, oh, you're asleep, wake up.
Yeah.
What's the guideline for being a sheeple, and what's the guideline for being awake? I know a lot of Alex Jones sheeple,
right?
So what is a sheeple,
Yeah, absolutely. And that just as with the labels for ideological stances and such bug me, so do people's mentality about calling each other names of, the sheeple. Who are the sheeple? Everybody has a different notion of why everybody else is asleep and needs to wake up to this certain reality or whatnot. That doesn't get you very far in actually pointing out any specifics about what is it that people need to wake up to. Quit worrying about how little anybody is on the same page with you, and start just needling away at all the little details. That's where the devil is, And here's a quote that I was thinking of when you're talking about that, and I was trying to come up with it. And it's R. Buckminster Fuller said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." The sentiment I was trying to convey about not necessarily playing into those huge systems that we already have, that everybody seems determined to take it over and make it do the right thing. Don't worry about taking over the system of control. You're just going to become the new boss, the same as the old boss. Don't focus on being the boss. Focus on living your life well, building community around you that with others who want to live well and just build small changes all the way through. I think the rest is inevitable, that the walls are going to come crumbling down around those huge systems that are in place right now. Everybody's focused on taking over those systems and implementing the right policies or whatnot, when really I think we just need an entirely new paradigm of how to govern ourselves, and that's going to arise out of people doing the work on the local level in small ways, and building a substantial culture of that all over the place that will look different everywhere, but that will be the go-to. They will be the leaders when the old systems fail and crumble. The people that have been doing the work of making small changes and building community that is more sustainable and more in touch with itself and tolerant of people, and that is there at the defense of those people who are a part of that community and are ready to expand that community to embrace everyone. Those are going to be the leaders that arise out of, I think, a crumbling of the system as it is. And that's another part about what's happening that I see happening in the years to come, is more and more we will see those systems crumble around us. I mean, look right now, the leaks from Edward Snowden about the NSA spying on everybody. I mean, when that came out, that he was a whistleblower saying that the National Security Agency is spying on all Americans and keeping a log of all of their electronic transactions and phone calls and messages and internet activity and Google searches, and all of that stuff is being kept in databases. That was no surprise to me.
No,
it was something that, if you were paying attention back in the Bush years, you knew that that was a part of the implementation of the Patriot Act and any number of different host of laws that were implemented in the name of trumping up national security procedures and the Office of Department of Homeland Security and all of this.
And patriotism.
Yeah, it was not a surprise to me, but I'm glad that it's something that evidently rung a bell for so many people who just never would have imagined before that that's actually happening. Things like that, I think, are going to continue to happen more frequently, and it's going to become more and more clear as we go down this road that regardless of the leadership that you thought you were getting with this person who represented your ideals and your hope and change, or whatever it may be in the next cycle or whatever, that people are going to be more and more disillusioned with these methods of changing things, and recognize that the tyrant is always going to be there so long as we provide them that status and the power to administrate such controls. It's going to be abused. I think we have a new awakening of understanding of how government works and such that people are going to be waking up to, because we'll see more and more of these things like Edward Snowden and Bradley Manning. And by the way, those people also were professed Ron Paul supporters.
Oh, yeah.
So you ask where the Ron Paul revolution goes from here, it's going everywhere. It's people who have come to a political kind of awakening that will inform their political conscience going onward, that not necessarily will be all monolithic in supporting a candidate, but will be everywhere.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you so much, Caleb. That was another fantastic 2 hours went by like the blink of an eye. I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we're definitely going to have to bring him back on the show at some point. I just want to let everybody know we've only got a few more seconds, that next week we're going to be speaking to Micah Hanks. He's from the Paradigm Shift Conference. He's going to be speaking on something called the UFO singularity, which should be very, very interesting.
There is no denying the world is awakening. We see it in the global uprisings and demonstrations of the people around the planet and the new way of thinking and living that is arising naturally within each one of us and our communities. I have been a major player in this global shift and movement for over 20 years and have helped tens of thousands of people around the world change their lives and find their voice in order to help create the paradigm change we so desperately need. Join me here at Revolution Radio on the Just Bernard Show every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time for 2 hours of powerful interviews and discussion with some of the most influential visionaries of consciousness, alternative media, and suppressed knowledge. We promise to reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience.